American life and the economy. Well, go figure the Boston Marathon bombings. And I took the Boston Marathon bombings as an opportunity to send out a press release saying what America needs to really understand is that the attack in Boston was not about body count. It was about dollar count. Those two young men in Boston held hostage the entire Boston metropolitan population. The government said to the people, go home, lock your doors and windows, and stay inside until we tell you to come out. That decision by the government, which I'm not going to fault with them, but what happened is those two young men who didn't look anything like terrorists, if you saw their pictures, with their caps turned backwards and their backpacks on, and their blue jeans, and looked like college students, those two young men cost the economy of Boston in excess of $1 billion for that 5 days. And I said to people, you have to go back and look at the September 11th bombings. And what I was saying to them was, look, you have to understand it's about money. And those two young men I see on the screen don't look like terrorists or your father's terrorists. They don't have a towel on their head. They don't have beards and mustaches. They're clean-shaven. They look like clean-cut American kids. The point being is that what happened on September the 11th is that, yes, we took down the World Trade Centers, and yes, we killed 2,300 people. Now, the next statistic I'm about to give you makes my wife wince every time I do it, but it's important to understand. Based on the current birth rate in the United States, the 2,700 people that were killed in the World Trade Center bombing were replaced in 43 minutes in the population. If you understand that the point of Osama bin Laden was to knock down the buildings, but really what he was trying to do was to shut down the American capital markets, and he did. He shut down the American capital markets and created, in essence, a recession by attacking on those two buildings. It's another example why it's about money. It isn't about body count. We as a country do not know much, if anything, about how Muslims think, especially radical Muslims. Just to give you an example of a couple of pieces that are going to be in my new series of books is a discussion about Sharia law. Now, I don't know whether many of your listeners understand Sharia law or you've ever talked about it, so I'm only going to pick with two pieces. There's a provision in Sharia law that allows a Muslim, when he is working with an infidel, a non-Muslim, he can lie, cheat, steal, do whatever he wants, and if whatever they do together fails, it is never his fault. It is always the infidel's fault. Always the infidel's fault. Why? Because everything that Muslims do are for a specific goal, and that's for the spread of Islam, and that's what they do. Now, there's another provision that deals the conduct under Sharia law of government officials and religious leaders. And what it says is that religious leaders and government officials can, when they're dealing with infidels, non-Muslims, can lie and do whatever they want to make sure that they further the goals of Islam. Now, when the President of the United States welcomed the new President of Iran, the next day, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, said to the world, you cannot trust this man, he lies. He can tell you, under Sharia law, that he's not doing anything to expand any nuclear weapons capacity, while at the same time doing it because he's permitted to do it under Sharia law because it furthers the goals of Islam. So they can stand right there. Now, this past week, we had all this situation with Obamacare. Most people are not aware that the UN is now beginning to question whether or not the Syrian government has disclosed all of their chemical weapons. What a surprise. A Muslim country that would be lying to the world? because it's in their best interest. Now, another one I think is a real interesting example under Sharia law. It says that a Muslim woman cannot marry a Jew infidel. Now, we have in the United States, in the city of New York, where I live part-time in that area, we had a recent mayoral primary. And one of the candidates in that primary was a gentleman by the name of Anthony Weiner, a former congressman who had to leave Congress because of his activities. He is married. His wife's name is Uma. She is a Muslim. Now, under Sharia law, normally under Sharia law, there would be no way in which a Muslim woman could marry outside of the faith, especially a Jew. But they allowed it to take place because the belief was that if she marries Anthony Weiner and he's elected mayor, then she can begin to, through her influence of her husband, begin to change the laws in New York City to look more like some of the laws in Sharia law. And if he were to be successful as mayor and decide to run for governor, then she would be the first lady of the state of New York and would have some possibility of influence. So because what she was doing was to the potential benefit of Islam, she was allowed to walk away from the laws that said that you must marry within your faith and you cannot marry a Jew. All was waived because what she was doing potentially was going to be to the benefit of Islam. And I don't know whether most people know this, she was also the chief of staff for Hillary Clinton. So, why is that all important? It's all important because Muslims are the fastest growing population in the world. They're all over the world. And as they grow in population, they grow in power. Look at France, look at England, of how the Muslims have had cultural impact on those countries. And it's causing the French and the English to begin to rebel because the governments are so politically correct, they're bowing to the Muslims in their countries. And so their job, they want to dominate the world any way they can, and as in many ways as they can. So what I'm trying to do is to say, look, you have to be aware of these things, and where are the vulnerabilities of us as a country? That's why the first book is so important. The second book is important because it says how do we deal with that catastrophic attack when it comes, because I believe it ultimately is coming. And then book 3, what do we do about the problem of terrorism in the world? Now, book 3, which is done, would normally come out a year from now, but everybody wants me to bring it out in late spring, early summer, because everybody wants to know what the response is. But I can tell you that there are people, my readers and other people, who have looked at book 3, and they tell me there are many sections in book 3 that they feel like standing up and clapping and applauding. So it's difficult to walk the line between reality and fiction. In book 2, there's a quotation on the front cover deals with the difference between which is scarier, reality or fiction. And the answer is, when you can't tell the difference, fiction is scarier. So the idea is, as a writer, forget all the political situation, my job is to entertain people, get them engaged. And I've been told that it's an extremely engaging series for a first-time writer.
Now, your background is in the finance, right?
Yes, I've been a registered investment advisor for 40 years.
Excellent. We talked about this before we went on the air, and I think this plays into, and I haven't read the second book. I don't have the galley proof or anything. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. But I have a copy of a report that came out in, what was it? I think it was 2009. And the title of the copy of the report is Economic Warfare, Risks, and Responses. This was prepared for the Pentagon, and in 2009 it created quite a splash when it came out because of what it proposed. And the proposition that it puts forth is this. Let me scroll down here. This is in the executive summary of the report, and I've read this 100 times on the show, so it's good to have an expert's opinion on this. The author says this. The hypothesis under consideration is that a three-phase attack is underway with two of those phases completed to date. The first phase was a speculative run-up in oil prices that generated as much as $2 trillion of excess wealth for oil-producing nations, filling the coffers of sovereign wealth funds, including those of Sharia-compliant finance. The second phase appears to have begun in 2008 with a series of bear raids targeting U.S. financial services firms that appear to be systematically significant. And the third phase, which he believes was about to begin, is a economic attack, a direct attack on the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. dollar. And at about the same time, and this is an audio clip that I am going to play. At about the same time, there was an interview on Financial Times TV, FT television. And it was an interview with George Soros. And George Soros said in the interview, and I quote, we have to create a new world order with the Chinese apparently at the head of it. And he also says this during that interview.
So an orderly decline of the dollar is actually desirable.
So you have George Soros that is attempting, I believe, to manage a quote-unquote orderly decline of the dollar. We have, and I believed all along that the run-up on the speculation on the price of oil was part of some sort of an attack. Because that sort of stuff just simply doesn't happen by accident. There was a reason behind it, and it just made no sense at the time. And if you recall, that ground this economy to a screeching halt. And then we also had the financial issues. And I don't believe in coincidences. I think they were both done on purpose. And I think somebody, or a group of somebodies, is working behind the scenes right now to collapse the system. And unfortunately, these clowns in Washington appear to be playing along with them. What say you to that?
Well, that's an interesting perspective. I don't think I disagree with you, but I'd like to have an attempt to scare you a little.
Okay.
Let's go back to Sharia law, because I sent out a press release a few weeks ago, and I said to the public. The press release had this question. Is the administration governing the nation under the Constitution or under Sharia law?
Oh, I've got an opinion about that.
Well, but this thing, now let me make my point. Then you can talk. If you understand, I don't know, and I have no way of knowing until and if he ever admits that he is a Muslim. So I don't have any way of knowing whether or not the President of the United States is a Muslim. But I do think that there is a situation where if you start to look at certain things, you can begin to say to yourself, wow, are decisions being made for the good of the people or the good of somebody else? Now let me give you a couple of quick examples. Let's talk about what everybody's talking about today and has been talking for the last week, and that was the collapse of Obamacare. If you understand that, as I talked to you earlier, that under Sharia law, everything is based on a goal, and that goal is the expansion of Islam. Now, I'm saying that I believe that there are people in our government who may not be Muslims, but understand the principles of Sharia law and may in fact have